Well, hello and welcome to another review and hopefully starting of a classic motorcycle. This is a BSA Gold Star. One of the most famous British bikes ever made, certainly post-war. It's the definitive 50s, early 60s classic cafe racer and has spawned a million copies. The Gold Star came about in 1937 when the famous racer Wal Handley rode a BSA Empire Star, which was a sporting pre-war 500cc bike, around the Brooklyn circuit, the old Brooklyn circuit, over 100 miles an hour. And if you managed to do that, you were awarded a Brooklyn's Gold Star. And so for the following year, BSA produced the Gold Star model, which was always their sporting 500cc single, and evolved until it finally ended up in the form you see here. So by the time we got to this model, which is an early 1960, it was still a 500cc overhead valve single, but suspension had gone from no suspension through a plunger into fully sprung rear end. Telescopic forks, of course. And this is the Clubmans model. So the Clubmans model differed from some of the others. You could buy a Scrambles version, you could get a Trials version, you could even get a road version. But the Clubmans is the one that perhaps people identify most with the Gold Star. And the things that made the Clubmans stand out was, obviously it had twin clocks, speedo rev counter, clip-on handlebars, which are very low, very tight-fitting mudguard at the front. The latest model had the large fin head, so big castings, all in alloy. Rev counter coming from the side here, going up. And there's little things you can see with the Gold Star to clear the sump. They actually hammered the frame. See, can you see there? It's actually tubular and it's completely flattened around. And they did it over an anvil with a big hammer. I mean, there's nothing particularly high tech about it. They also came in this guise, which is in the sort of the sporting variant, the one people know, with a smoothbore carburettor called Amel GP. Now I've got the Amel GP at home sitting in a box because it's a complete nightmare on the road. The Amel GP had only one big main jet, it had no idle circuit. I've replaced this with a similar size Mikuni, Japanese carburettor. As you see, it's a great bucket of a thing. And you could specify a number of different gearbox types, which sounds a bit daft, but the gearbox, which is separate, which sits here, so the engine's here, chain driving this for the gearbox. The gearbox itself came in a set of various different ratios. There was standard ratios, there was trials ratios, which were lower gears, all 4-speed. There was scrambles ratios, which is very nice on the road actually. And then there was this, which is, if you look carefully, you can see it says RRT2. Now, I've never owned a motorcycle where when you pull into a garage or car park when it's other bikers, people are immediately drawn to it. And the very first thing they do is they come over and they check the engine number to make sure it's a DBD34. You can see that as a start of it, which means it's basically the latest high performance or the last high performance version of it. Then once they've done that, they lean over the bike and then they check to see if it says RRT2. And only then are they satisfied that it might actually be a real Gold Star. They're fairly easy bikes to copy, at least cosmetically. But the difference between the Gold Star and all the other models they made was that they were hand assembled using the best parts. And it's one of the very few motorcycles I've ever owned where it's more than the sum of its parts. If you took a tuned B33 500cc engine, which is not broadly dissimilar, and you put hot cams in it, and you put a big carb on it, and you put a noisy exhaust, and all of those things, you would end up with quite a nice bike. But this has got something about it. Every single bike that they sold new came with a certificate where it had been put on a dynamometer, so they measured its brake horsepower, and so it would have the engine number, it would have the power output, it would have the carburettor size, the jetting, the revs, everything else. And in this form they made about 38-40 horsepower, depending on how lucky you were really, and in their ultimate form they made about 45 horsepower. Won production races everywhere. Magneto Ignition, so instead of a coil ignition, it we've got the dynamo here, the Magneto underneath, and that's controlled by this thing, which is a manual advance retard, and on full advance it kicks very hard indeed. There is a story that the only reason that BSA stopped making the Gold Star, stopped making the A10 Rocket Gold Star, and Triumph stopped making the early Bonnevilles was because Lucas had decided to stop manufacturing the Magneto. So they were all forced to consider redesigning their engines, and BSA took the opportunity to combine the gearbox and the engine into one piece, and then have coil ignition, which is the sort of thing that we all know now. So this is really the last of the Magneto engines, and a racing Magneto differs from a standard one in one easy way. Normally, to advance an engine when you're running, you pull it this way, so you stretch the cable. On a racing mag, it's the other way, because on a road bike, if the cable was to snap, the engine would automatically default to full retard, which means you could still start it and bumble home. On a race bike, you only start it once, so what you do is if the cable snaps, it goes to full advance, which is race mode, so that's how you'd have it. Similarly with the gearbox, this RRT2 gearbox, which everybody loves, is actually a bit of a pain on the road. It's a bit like a 6-speed box, but first and second gear are missing. So effectively you're pulling away in third, then you've got fourth, fifth, sixth. So it's really, really highly geared. So for an old bike, this is now 60 something years old, it'll do 60 mile an hour in first, it'll do about 75 in second, about 85, 90 in third, and maximum speeds about 110, 115, depending on how brave you are. It's tremendous. Around town it's a real pain, you have to slip the clutch everywhere, it shudders and vibrates as it pulls away, but once you're on the open road it's just a glorious thing. Every year I put this bike away in the autumn, winter, wax it up, and I think in the spring I'm going to sell it, and I get the bike running and I ride it around the block and think, why on earth would I sell it? The other thing this one's got is this glorious tank. This was an optional extra which you'd buy from the dealer, and it's called a litre tank or litre tank, and they were made of aluminium and they held about 4.5 gallons. This is an original litre tank, and you can always tell an original one because the welding's crap, because it was done by hand back in those days. Now they would do it all with TIG weld, and so it would be super smart and shiny. So you can always tell an old one, and this tank is probably on its own worth about 2.5 grand. I've got the original tank as well, next to the carburettor, neither of which I use. So this is a DBD34 BSA Gold Star from very early 1960. I hope you like it. So what we're going to try and do now is see if it'll start. Gold Stars are notoriously difficult to start, but we'll have a go. So petrol on, kickstart, footrest up. We'll retard the ignition a bit, otherwise I'll be thrown over the handlebars and into that river. And then you'll need to bear with me because I have to try and do all this one-handed. But we'll have a go. We turn the engine over until we reach top dead centre. So compression is there, so the footrest stops. Let it go to the top, pull the decompressor lever in, bring it over just a fraction, and with a bit of luck, one kick-starting Gold Star, more than the sum of its parts. One of the very, very few motorcycles it is. I hope you like it.